one thing that I always found really interesting is this idea of liberating content kind of into the real world. And one of the things we were talking to it with Spotify back in the day was how can you create a value adds layer of experience to what Spotify does, right? So for example, you could create a kind of a gamified or just an interesting way of experiencing a city through the lens of music, right? So being able to go around London and experience different artists, different music, artwork, album artwork, based on different locations. That's obviously, Spotify, um, in terms of like what they do, that might make sense from a kind of an end consumer point of view. But you could also see that being unlocked through Web3 and through individual creators creating their own kind of content experiences, being able to monetize that. I think just when you layer on this idea of digital ownership onto the real world, that can be monetized and can have a create new kinds of incentives for creators and for users. I think it's just really interesting. I think it unlocks a bunch of interesting use cases that really fuse the real world with digital in a way that's meaningful and not just gimmicky.
Yeah, I think I see the real world as kind of the sticky brick, as it were, in between the two. Um, in that, as you say, augmented reality, spatial web, whatever you want to call it, is increasingly about augmenting the real world, layering digital content on the real world. And actually, one of the trends in Web3 and blockchain that I'm excited about, and which obviously Darabase is involved in, is this tokenization and fractionalization of real world assets. And yes, that could be a barrel of whiskey, or it could be an artwork, or whatever. But equally, the biggest asset class in the world is property. And so, actually thinking about from a Web3 perspective how property or property rights can be kind of tokenized and leased and traded and monetized and valued, and then thinking on the other side of the coin about how those, that can be done through digital content augmentation, etc. That feels to me like a really strong bond between those two trends.
Agreed. And I think from a purely crypto Web3 point of view, and there's a lot of nonsense in Web3, as you know, there's a lot of very clever and sometimes not very clever Ponzi's, and it is a natural, I think, trend for any kind of like new tech where there's kind of money to be made. However, there's a very strong sense in which real world assets is one of the real main use cases that blockchain has unlocked and was in a way designed to unlock.
Yeah.
So this is huge. I think what's happening right now with everything to do with obviously real world assets and bringing a bunch of them on chain, everything from T-bills to real estate to there's a broad spectrum. There's a real reason for why that makes sense, and it's in Web3 we want to distinguish between narrative, which is just like what is hot at the moment and what makes money. Like I would argue that those early metaverse days of 2020, like 2021, were more of a narrative than a use case because hardly anyone was using it, and that wasn't really a practical reason for users to be interacting in those worlds. It was slow. It was not very good from a user experience point of view. Not really great. Narrative and use case. And use case is the real thing. It's like, okay, why does this actually exist and why does it need to exist on blockchain? And I think real world assets are really a great example of something that is a true use case. And I think it's a pretty exciting time for what you guys are doing and in general for real